What is the price of a child's life? I don't mean that as a philosophical question. I mean it literally. I mean, what number do you write on a piece of paper and slide across a desk and say, until you reach this number, your child waits? $144,000. That was the number. That was the price St. Anthony's Hospital put on a 7-year-old girl named Nadia, a little girl who liked soccer, who made her teacher cry on the last day of school because she hugged her so hard, who had absolutely no idea that somewhere in an office building, a man she would never meet had looked at her file and written 2 sentences that would decide whether she lived or died. Advised the family to explore financing options. That's it. That's all he wrote, 9 words about a child. Now, there was one man in that entire hospital who read those 9 words and something inside him broke, not from weakness, from the complete opposite of weakness. He didn't write a complaint. He didn't send an email. He didn't post about it. He acted that night alone in the dark, knowing exactly what it would cost him. 3 weeks later, he was sitting in my courtroom in handcuffs, charged with 4 crimes, his entire career on the line, his life hanging by a thread. My name is Judge Judy, 30 years on this bench. I have seen everything this world is capable of, the very worst of people, and occasionally the very best. What I heard in that courtroom on March 14th, 2024, I will carry it with me until the day I die. You need to hear this story, every single word of it, because it will break your heart, restore your faith, and make you question everything you think you know about the law and about what it truly means to be human. Don't go anywhere. Let me take you back to the beginning. Dr. Caleb Monroe was not the kind of man who made the news. He was the kind of man who worked 18-hour shifts in silence. He was a pediatric cardiac surgeon at St. Anthony's Children's Hospital in Newark, New Jersey, one of the top 3 in his specialty in the entire country. His colleagues described him as the steadiest hands in the building. The doctor parents prayed for when their child was the one on the table. He was not wealthy by surgeon standards. He drove a 2016 Honda Accord with a cracked rear bumper. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment 15 minutes from the hospital because he never knew when he'd need to be back in under 30 minutes. He had no wife, no children of his own. He had a goldfish named Clarence and a shelf full of medical journals. That was his life, and he loved it. Now let me tell you about a little girl named Nadia Osei. 7 years old, the daughter of Emmanuel and Grace Osei, Ghanaian immigrants who had come to this country 12 years earlier with nothing but a suitcase and a belief that hard work meant something here. Emmanuel worked the overnight shift stocking shelves at a warehouse. Grace cleaned rooms at a hotel near the airport 6 days a week. They had saved for 4 years to buy a small house in Trenton. Nadia was their only child. Her 2nd grade teacher wrote in her report, Nadia is the kind of child who comes along once in a career. She lights up every room she enters. In November of 2023, Nadia was diagnosed with a rare pediatric heart defect, a critical aortic coarctation. It had gone undetected. It was getting worse fast. Dr. Monroe reviewed her scans. He knew immediately she needed surgery within 6 weeks, or the likelihood that this 7-year-old child would simply not wake up one morning was over 80%. Emmanuel and Grace had health insurance through Emmanuel's employer, basic coverage, the kind that sounds like protection until you actually need it. St. Anthony's billed $187,000. Their insurance approved $43,000. The remaining $144,000, the family's responsibility, $144,000 for a warehouse worker and a hotel housekeeper. They tried everything. They called the billing department every single day. Grace went in person twice, sat in that office with Nadia's scans in a manila folder, and begged. She described how Nadia had lost 4 pounds in the past month because her little heart was working too hard just to keep her alive. The billing department was not unkind. They were not monsters. They were administrators following a policy. Without 30% down, $4,200, the surgery could not be scheduled. Dr. Monroe went to his department head. He went above her to hospital administrator Marcus Webb. Webb reviewed the file. He was not a doctor. He was a businessman. He responded in 2 sentences. The hospital's financial exposure on charity exceptions this quarter is already above threshold. Advised the family to explore financing options. financing options for a 7-year-old with a failing heart. Dr. Monroe read that email, and something inside him changed forever. Stop for just 1 second. If you felt what I felt reading that email, that tightening in your chest, that disbelief, that anger, hit the like button right now. Not for me, for Nadia, for every family that has ever been handed a number they could never reach and told to figure it out. Let the world know this story matters. Hit like, and let's keep going, because what Dr. Monroe did next will take your breath away. On the night of December 3rd, 2023, Dr. Caleb Monroe did not go home after his shift. He stayed. At 11:47 p.m., after the administrative staff had left, after the billing office was empty, after the security guard had completed his 11:30 round and wouldn't return until midnight, Dr. Monroe used his key card to access the medical imaging wing. He went to the equipment storage room. He removed a portable echocardiogram unit valued at $34,000 and a surgical prep kit. He loaded both into his Honda Accord. He drove 12 blocks to a small community clinic run by a retired nurse named Dorothy Chambers, who had been keeping it open out of her own savings for 11 years. Then he called the Osei family. Midnight. Told them to come now. Emmanuel dressed without turning on the lights. He carried Nadia to the car, still wrapped in her blanket, her small head against his shoulder, asleep and unaware that this night might be the one that saved her life. At 2:14 a.m., in that small clinic, Dr. Monroe performed a full pre-surgical cardiac assessment on Nadia. No authorization, no documentation, off the books entirely. What he found confirmed everything he had feared. The narrowing in her aorta had progressed faster than projected. It was now severe. He showed Emmanuel and Grace the imaging on his phone. He didn't soften it. He told them their daughter needed surgery within 10 days, not 6 weeks, 10 days. And then he told them what he was going to do about it. He said he would document his findings officially under his own medical license and submit them to the hospital as emergency reclassification. Under New Jersey emergency medical statutes, a documented emergency could not be denied regardless of financial clearance. The hospital would have no choice. Emmanuel Osei looked at this man, this doctor who had driven through the night, who had put everything on the line, who was sitting in a folding chair at 2 a.m. in a community clinic explaining a plan that could destroy his career, and he couldn't speak. Grace reached across and took Dr. Monroe's hand in both of hers and held it. Dr. Monroe drove home just before dawn. He did not sleep. The next morning at 6:47 a.m., the morning shift supervisor did her inventory check. The echocardiogram unit and the surgical prep kit, gone. She pulled the security footage. It was perfectly clear. Dr. Caleb Monroe, his face, his key card, his Honda pulling out of the loading bay at 11:52 p.m. She called Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb called the police. At 8:15 a.m., 2 officers knocked on Dr. Monroe's apartment door. He opened it before they could knock a second time. He was already dressed, the same plain clothes he would later wear in my courtroom. On the kitchen table behind him was a 4-page handwritten statement, every detail of what he had done, every reason why, written in the same steady hand that had operated on dozens of children's hearts over 13 years. He had been up all night writing it, not because he was afraid, because he wanted it to be complete. He wanted there to be no confusion about what had happened or why. He did not resist. He did not deny a single thing. He picked up the statement, held it out, and asked one question. Can you make sure the hospital knows Nadia Osei needs emergency reclassification? She doesn't have time for this to sit in paperwork. The arresting officer, Officer David Reyes, 17 years on the force, testified in my courtroom that he stood in that doorway for a moment and didn't know what to say. He said in all his years he had arrested people who cried, people who ran, people who bargained, people who threatened. He had never arrested someone who, in that moment, was worried about someone else. He made the call himself from the patrol car on the way to the station. Nadia's surgery was reclassified as emergency the same morning, scheduled within 48 hours. A different surgeon performed it while Dr. Monroe sat in a holding cell, still in the clothes he had been arrested in, waiting to hear if it had worked. Nadia survived. She is alive today because of what he did. And now Dr. Caleb Monroe was sitting in my courtroom facing 4 criminal charges, a maximum of 12 years in prison, and the permanent revocation of the medical license he had spent his entire adult life earning. When Dr. Monroe walked into my courtroom on the morning of March 14th, 2024, I noticed 3 things immediately. First, he walked in alone. No expensive attorney beside him. A public defender named Rachel Ortiz, young, prepared, carrying a folder that looked like it had been organized and reorganized a dozen times. Second, in the gallery, in the second row, sat Emmanuel and Grace Osei. Grace was wearing her hotel work uniform. She had come straight from her morning shift. Emmanuel sat beside her with his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on Dr. Monroe's back. Between them, on the bench, was a child's drawing, crayon, bright colors, that I would later learn Nadia had sent with her parents that morning. She had drawn a man in a white coat with a big red heart on his chest. Underneath it, in 7-year-old handwriting, she had written, "My doctor." Third, Dr. Monroe had not slept. I could see it. Not the kind of tired that comes from one bad night, the kind that settles into a person's bones over weeks. He sat down. He looked at me. He did not look away. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Kevin Torrance, presented the charges methodically: breaking and entering, unauthorized use of hospital property, theft, reckless endangerment. He had documentation for everything, and he made one argument that silenced the entire room. He said that if we allowed a doctor to steal equipment because he believed his cause was just, we had told every person in this country that institutional systems can be overridden by personal moral judgment. He said this was not heroism, it was chaos wearing the costume of heroism. The courtroom was very quiet after that, because he was not entirely wrong. Then I asked Dr. Monroe to speak. He stood slowly, plain white shirt, no tie, hands at his sides, and he looked at me with eyes that had nothing left to hide. "Your Honor, I knew what I was doing was illegal. I'm not standing here to argue that it wasn't. I'm not going to insult this courtroom by pretending I didn't know the rules I was breaking." He paused. In the gallery, Grace Osei pressed her hand to her mouth. "But I am a doctor. I took an oath, not to a hospital, not to a quarterly budget. I took an oath to my patient, and my patient was a 7-year-old child whose heart was failing. I had the ability to help her. I had the knowledge. I had the equipment. The only thing standing between her and that help was a piece of paper that said her family hadn't paid enough yet." One more pause. The courtroom held its breath. I chose the oath. I heard Grace Osei begin to cry, quietly, completely. I did not turn to look. I kept my eyes on Dr. Monroe. But I will tell you something I have never said publicly before. In 30 years on this bench, I have trained myself not to feel in the courtroom. Feeling clouds judgment. Feeling is for after. But in that moment, when that man said those 3 words, I chose the oath, I felt something shift in my chest, something I had not felt in a very long time. I looked down at my notes. I took a breath. I gave myself 3 seconds. Then I looked back up and I did my job. Before I tell you my ruling, I need you to do one thing. If you believe this man deserves to have his story heard by every person in this country, share this video right now. Send it to someone. Post it. Because people like Dr. Caleb Monroe exist in this world, and most of them never get seen. Share it and subscribe so you never miss another story like this. Now, let me tell you what I decided. I have made rulings in 30 years that I lost sleep over. A few I still think about. This was the hardest of my career. The prosecutor was right that the law does not bend for good intentions. I have said that myself 1,000 times. The law is a tool, magnificent, essential, and imperfect. My job is not just to apply it. My job is to ensure it serves justice. Those 2 things are usually the same. Sometimes, rarely, they are not. I looked at Dr. Caleb Monroe. I told him that what he did was illegal. I told him I could not pretend otherwise. I told him that if I dismissed every charge and sent him home with a handshake, I would be saying the law is negotiable whenever someone feels strongly enough. He nodded. He already knew. And then I told him the rest. I told him I had read every piece of evidence in this case, every email, every billing record, every page of Nadia Osei's medical file. I had read Marcus Webb's 2 sentences, advised the family to explore financing options. And I had read Dr. Monroe's 4-page handwritten statement, which read like a man confessing to a priest, not a police officer. I told him that the law recognized something called the doctrine of necessity, that in rare, extraordinary circumstances, an unlawful act committed to prevent a greater harm may be treated differently than a willful, malicious crime. I told him this was one of those circumstances. I found him guilty of unauthorized use of hospital property, a misdemeanor, sentenced to 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service at Dorothy Chambers Clinic, and a $500 fine. Every other charge dismissed. The courtroom erupted, not in chaos, in something I had never heard in 30 years, a collective exhale, like a room full of people had been holding their breath for the same moment and finally let it go. There was applause. There were tears. I banged my gavel, not for order. I needed a moment myself. In the second row, Emmanuel Osei stood up and put both arms around his wife. She buried her face in his chest, and they just stood there holding each other in the middle of my courtroom, and nobody told them to sit down. The prosecutor looked at his notes, then looked at me, then quietly sat back down. He did not appeal. I learned later he went home that night and called his own mother. His words, not mine. Here is what happened after that day. The New Jersey Medical Board reviewed Dr. Monroe's license. Based on the ruling, the extraordinary circumstances and testimony from 17 colleagues and 3 former patients' families whose children he had saved, they issued the lightest possible formal reprimand and allowed him to continue practicing medicine. Marcus Webb resigned from St. Anthony's Children's Hospital 3 months later. The resignation letter cited personal reasons. He has not been publicly heard from since. I noticed that too. St. Anthony's Hospital quietly revised their financial clearance policy for pediatric emergencies. No press conference, no announcement. Under the new policy, no child under the age of 16 may be denied scheduling for a critical cardiac procedure solely on the basis of an outstanding balance. The policy change was filed with the State Health Board on a Tuesday afternoon in June. It received no coverage. But it is real, and it is permanent. And somewhere in New Jersey right now, there is a family that will never know they were protected by it. They did not credit Dr. Monroe in the policy change. I noticed that. Nadia Osei is 8 years old now. She is in 2nd grade. She plays soccer on Saturday mornings. Her mother sent me a photograph. I did not ask for it, but I am deeply glad I received it, of Nadia standing in her green and yellow soccer uniform, both arms raised above her head, her face turned up toward the sky, laughing. The biggest smile you have ever seen on a human face. I keep it in my desk drawer. I have looked at it many times. Dr. Caleb Monroe completed every hour of his community service at Dorothy Chambers Clinic. His probation ended 8 months ago. He still volunteers there every other Sunday. He and Dorothy Chambers have apparently become close friends. She is 71 years old, and by all accounts, she can outwork him on a long afternoon shift. He still drives the same Honda with the cracked rear bumper. I checked. I think about this case often, more than I expected to. I think about that email, 9 words, about a child. I think about Grace Osei sitting at a billing office window with a manila folder in her lap. I think about Emmanuel stocking shelves in a warehouse at 3 a.m., believing, because this country told him to believe, that working hard meant your child would be safe. And I think about a man who drove a cracked Honda, who had no wife and no children, and a shelf full of medical journals, and a goldfish named Clarence, who sat down alone at his kitchen table in the middle of the night and wrote 4 pages explaining why he had chosen his oath over everything he had built, and then answered the door the next morning, already dressed, and handed it over. Here is what I want you to understand. The law was not the enemy in this story. Applied with judgment and humanity, the law did what it was supposed to do. It held a man accountable, and it also recognized that there are moments in human life that rules alone are not equipped to navigate. The enemy was indifference, that email, those 9 words, the quiet bureaucratic willingness to let a child die on a spreadsheet because the numbers didn't clear. Indifference is always the enemy. In courtrooms, in hospitals, in offices, in the small daily decisions every one of us makes about whether to notice the person next to us who is struggling and whether to do something about it. Dr. Monroe noticed, and then he did something about it, at great cost to himself. with complete clarity about what it would mean, and he would do it again tomorrow without a second thought. I have spent 30 years asking people to stand up in my courtroom and tell the truth, knowing the truth might destroy them. Most people are afraid of that. Most people hedge. Most people find the middle ground where they can protect themselves and still feel decent about who they are. Dr. Caleb Monroe did not look for the middle ground. He went all the way to the edge and stepped off. That is not recklessness. That is what courage actually looks like. Quiet, costly, certain. Done in the dark, alone, when no one is watching, for no reason except that it is right. Before you go, 3 things. First, leave a comment right now. Would you have done what Dr. Monroe did? Tell me honestly. Second, subscribe to this channel. I have more stories like this, stories that will make you angry, make you cry, and remind you that justice is still alive because people are still choosing it. Third, share this video. Share it for Nadia. Share it for Dr. Monroe. Share it for every family sitting in a hospital billing office right now, holding a number they cannot reach. Let them know this world still has people in it who choose the oath. Thank you for being here. Remember, in the courtroom, it is just you, the law, and the truth. And sometimes the truth is the most powerful thing in the room.